Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 1060 of the Juicebox Podcast. Well, this one's going to be a little different. Today, I am talking to two sisters, Naomi, who is 50, and Simma, 45. They both have type 1 diabetes. While you're listening, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. If you're looking for a community around type 1 or type 2 diabetes, check out the Juicebox Podcast private Facebook group. Now, I know I just said type 1 or type 2, and now I'm about to tell you that it's called Juicebox Podcast Type 1 Diabetes, but we have so many people in there, it just doesn't even matter anymore. 43,000 members strong, 125 posts a day. There is something happening in there for you. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes on Facebook, an absolutely free and absolutely private diabetes Facebook group. And if you want to look into any of the series within the podcast, you can go into the featured tab of that private group or the menu at the top of juiceboxpodcast.com. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by US Med. usmed.com/juicebox. US Med is a fantastic supporter of the Juicebox Podcast and also the place where Arden gets her Omnipod and Dexcom supplies from. But you can get those and much more at usmed.com/juicebox. Head over there now to get your free benefits check or call 888-721-1514. Get your benefits check and get started today with US Med. Naomi is 50. She was diagnosed in November of 2020. Simma is 45, and she was diagnosed in 1986 when I was in high school. So let's talk to Simma first because it came first for her. Simma, are you the younger of the two sisters? Obviously, yes. What was it like? And do you have other siblings?
It was terrifying. I had a lot of the symptoms that a lot of people who are guests on this podcast describe. I was in fourth grade. I started wetting the bed, which was not normal. I was drinking excessive amounts, going to the bathroom very often. I was losing weight, and I was a pretty skinny child to begin with. And my mother said, something's wrong. I think she probably had a clue because her father had diabetes, even though they thought he had type 2. But when we get to know to Naomi, I guess we can say that he probably had type 1. He got it as an adult, and I don't think they knew at that time that adults could get type 1.
Yeah.
So my mother took me to the pediatrician, and they did a urine test, and they said I had diabetes. I'm the third of 5 children. Naomi's the oldest. Then we have a brother, then is me, and then 2 younger sisters.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else have any hypothyroidism, celiac type 1 stuff?
I have hypothyroidism. My mother has hypothyroidism, but she only got that, I think, even after I did. I got it as an adult.
Did you get it after you had a baby? Simma, did you get it after you had a baby by any chance?
I had it while I was pregnant with my third child, which the doctor said was unusual because most people get it after they have a baby.
Mm-hmm. You know, this is interesting. I just put up an episode last week with a 70-year-old guy named Lou, and he was terrific. But he was diagnosed when he was 36. And early on, I said to him, when they diagnosed you, you know, they thought you had type 2 diabetes. And he said, yes. And I said, but now we know you have type 1. And he was like, well, I don't know. And it's so 26 years the man's had diabetes. And he was sharp. Like, I know he's 70, so you're maybe like, well, maybe he just didn't. This guy was razor sharp, really knew what he was doing, understood everything top to bottom. I think under penalty of death, he couldn't have told me for sure which type of diabetes he had. But I contacted his daughter-in-law, and he absolutely has type 1 diabetes. So you think that you had someone in your family who lived the whole life believing they had type 2?
Well, we never met my grandfather. He died when Naomi was a few months old, but he got diabetes as an adult, and I've seen pictures of him, and he was very thin. So wasn't the classic type 2 type of build.
Mm-hmm. Do you know how he
So
managed
I'd
it?
imagine he might have been type 1. And they always said, is there diabetes in your family? And my mother said, well, my father, but he's type 2. And they said, well, that's a different thing. But maybe it was the same thing.
It's fantastic. Do you know how he managed it? Do either of you know?
I think maybe boiling needles and
He was
testing his sugar with.
He was
I mean, this is.
I'm sorry, I'm running you over, but was he was injecting insulin?
I think so, but I'm not sure. I'd have to
Okay.
check with my mother.
That's fair. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're little and skinny and scared. And do you remember? I mean, it's such a long time ago, but do you remember anything about it? Do you remember like the hospital
Yes.
or the lead up? Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yes. So my mother, they said, go straight to the emergency room. We went to the emergency room. I told my mother I was thirsty because I'm always thirsty. And she bought me a Sprite. So I remember this very clearly. And I'm drinking the Sprite. And they said to me, like, we think you should be drinking that. And I was like, but I love Sprite. So it was like, that was like, what? I'm never going to be able to drink Sprite again. I just remember being I think they let me finish it. I'm pretty sure my sugar was in the 600s when they tested it, which based on things I've heard is not so terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the hospital for about a week. It was very scary.
And no more Lyman flavor for you ever again. Do we all remember the marketing around Sprite when we were kids? They were like, it's got Lyman. I was like,
I don't remember that. But that's cute.
Lemon lime. They were like, it's Lyman.
I get it.
Yeah, I absolutely paid way too close attention to commercials when I was younger. Okay, so do you spend any appreciable amount of time in the hospital?
Yes, I think it was a week or close to a week.
Mm-hmm.
They taught me how to inject using an orange. I remember that. That was like the fake leg or the fake arm was the orange.
Mm-hmm.
We got a meter. We got a sliding scale for meals. The meter was an AccuCheck. The device that lanced my finger killed. It was not what they have today. My mother called it the guillotine. It was like you put your finger in there and it just got chopped. We had to put the blood on the strip, wait a certain amount of time. The machine would beep. You wiped off the blood and then you put the strip into the machine. So we've come a long way.
Yeah, no kidding. Jen, I don't know if you guys listen to the podcast, but Jenny, who's on a lot of the episodes with me, she had the guillotine when she was younger. And
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
She says not.
Yeah, I remember.
We're your biggest fans.
I was just my next question was gonna be, Simma, is this the longest Naomi's been quiet in your adult life?
Well, I have to just say, I mean, jumping ahead, but I didn't learn about the podcast till Naomi got diabetes. So she introduced me. Oh. And then I was like, oh my God, this is incredible.
I'm very happy to hear that. So, Naomi, tell me a little bit about your diagnosis.
So I was misdiagnosed. Like, I actually heard a very similar story to my diagnosis on the podcast. Mm-hmm. I had Hashimoto's. They called it Hashimoto's and Graves' disease. I was diagnosed actually right after my honeymoon. I was 21, and I had this horrible thyroid issue, and so I've been taking Synthroid ever since. I had radioactive iodine done in 1996, and I was pretty healthy. I have 5 children, never had any issues. My weight fluctuated, and I would go see my endocrinologist every 6 months. And my A1C, I would say for like the 3 years before I was diagnosed, was inching upwards. It was in the 6s. And he would say to me, oh, it's type 2. You have to watch your weight. You have to eat healthy. Meanwhile, my weight fluctuated, but I wasn't extremely heavy. Mm-hmm. And I worked out every day. Like, I didn't have the lifestyle issues of type 2. So I said, okay, fine. He'd just adjust my Synthroid and I would just go home and that would be it. Then during COVID, I got some sort of yeast infection that wouldn't go away. And I went to the gynecologist, which was very hard to get into at that time. It was like October 2020. And he I guess as just a standard test, he tested my glucose and he came back and he said, your glucose is well into the 200s. Does that sound weird to you? And the endocrinologist had actually given me a blood glucose meter, but I never used it. But I said, they did mention to me that I might be type 2, so that doesn't really sound weird to me. So then I came home and my husband's a paramedic and I told him what happened. And he's like, oh my God, we have to test your blood sugar. And when he tested it, it was in the 300s. And he's like, oh my God. And I'm like, calm down. And and then
calm down. Yeah. Listen, you be nice to that guy. You got sick right after you got married. You're lucky you didn't go out for milk and not come back.
I know.
He'd be like, what happened here?
We're good. But I did get very sick though. But like type 1 never even, and it never dawned on anyone. He knew my sister had diabetes, and he retired immediately after during COVID, he retired. And I'm like, thank God he retired, because he can't misdiagnose other people. Because I mean,
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, I thought that's where you were going. Like, he retired because he's so bad at this.
He's just so bad. Like, why didn't he test my C-peptide? Why didn't I get the antibody test? Like, so anyway, when I was officially diagnosed, my A1C was in the 11s. So, it was just totally preventable. Mm-hmm. Not preventable, but maybe I could have, I don't know. I didn't have to get to that point.
Yeah.
That's it, and then I'm type 1.
Yeah, ta-da. I have to tell you, I laughed inappropriately a moment ago. I thought you were joking that your husband stopped being a paramedic because he was bad at it.
No.
And then I realized you were talking about the doctor.
He's too good at it. He's too good at it. Yeah, but I knew nothing. I mean, I knew, even though my sister had type 1, I really knew nothing about it. And they obviously gave me no information. It was just, don't drive when you're low. That was like the nugget I got from the doctor. And so I
was going to say, it is interesting, right? Because Simma's diagnosed right on the cusp of like when things are changing. Like there's all of a sudden there's meters in people's homes, and other insulins are coming on the market and everything. But are you telling me you guys grew up together, and Naomi, you don't know anything about diabetes on the day you're diagnosed?
I knew that she had. I sound like the word. I knew that she had to take insulin. I knew that. I knew certain things. I didn't know the day-to-day management of it. When she was diagnosed, I was 13. I actually said to her, it's funny, it's not funny, but I would say like a few months after I got diagnosed, we're 4 sisters, and we were at a family function. And I said, I just have to apologize to you that I never realized how hard your life was. And she's like, you think? But I think I was a teenager, and I just wasn't focused on her. I remember when she was diagnosed. I remember the day she was diagnosed, my mother came home from the hospital and said, Simmy has diabetes. Don't talk to me now. Like, it was obviously a very traumatic experience for my parents. But I was a teenager, and we actually went to camp. We went to Israel I think you were 15 and I was 19. And my mother wanted me to work in the camp so I can keep an eye on her. And I remember I had to learn how to give a shot in like an orange. So if she ever needed a shot, I would be able to give it to her, but I never had to do anything. I mean, I guess she managed it very well on her own, which is unbelievable when I hear the stories on the podcasts about kids. I mean, I think she really did it on her own. I mean, Simmy, maybe you could speak to that.
By the way, I want to point out that I'm not mispronouncing Simma's name. It's her sister.
Sorry.
So, because I'm going to come off like the schmuck that can't hear somebody saying Simmy. All right. But Simma, does it surprise you to know how little Naomi understood about the diabetes, or does that make sense to you?
I think it makes sense. I mean, I guess like my mother and I were in this little bubble where in the beginning she did everything for me. She gave me all my shots, but I was already 9. So I'd say probably by a year or 2 later, I was giving my own shots, even if my mother was still very involved at that point in the care. But it's funny that she says like, wow, she did so well as a kid and everything. I mean, my control was terrible. But if you think about the type of technology that's available today and the type of research that's been done on like how important it is to keep your sugars low and stable all the time. I mean, when I first got diagnosed, I think they said like test in the morning, eat your breakfast, and then test before dinner. And there's a whole lot of hours there, and eat lunch without taking a shot. It would just be like, oh, your long-acting insulin is going to cover your lunch.
Yeah. And they had no real like outcome goals. But isn't it interesting in a world where there are memes everywhere that say things like, you can't see my burden and things like that, that your own sister would say, I thought she did great because you were standing up, probably because you weren't crying and yelling. They were probably like, yeah, she's okay.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah. But you didn't grow up feeling like you were okay. Is that right? If you have diabetes, you need diabetes supplies. Why not get them in a way that is easy and relaxed without having to worry all the time. No, just always, is my stuff going to come? Do I have to go to the pharmacy? Do I have to call somebody? Like, none of that with US Med. You get set up with US Med, and it's just as easy as like clicking on an email. That's how we do it, at least. They'll call you if you like, or I think even text messages. You have to check me on the text messages thing. But, they'll call you, or they'll send you an email and just say, hey, look, your supplies, they're ready for reorder. You want them? I get that email and I click on it. I go, yes, thank you. And then it just shows up at the house. As a matter of fact, when Arden's at school, if I want the supplies to go there, I just get on the phone. I call them up. I say, hey, this time, send this order to her college address. No problem. Just gets done. Fast and free shipping. And by the way, every time you order with US Med, you get 90 days worth of supplies. So you're not doing this constantly. Understand what I'm saying? Email comes a couple of times a year, bada bing, bada boom, clicky click, and you're on your way. Actually, one time we had a little backlog of something, and I was able to say, you know what? Not this time, thanks. And they were just like, cool, we'll get back to you the next time. It was that easy. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. You're calling or clicking to get your free benefits check, finding out if US Med takes your insurance, which you got a really good chance of them doing because they accept Medicare nationwide and over 800 private insurers. US Med carries everything from insulin pumps, diabetes testing supplies, to the latest CGMs, like the Freestyle Libre 3 and the Dexcom G7. But if you want the G6 or the Libre 2, they have that as well. They also have Omnipod DASH and Omnipod 5 and the Tandem pump. Oh, what is that? The T-Slim? They got that one. They got what you want. usmed.com/juicebox. Over 1 million people with diabetes have been served by US Med since 1996. And it's their solemn promise to give you better service and better care. You want white glove treatment? You want US Med. Links in the show notes. Links at juiceboxpodcast.com. usmed.com/juicebox. Or did you?
No, I did. I think I kind of dreaded going to the doctor and getting that high A1C. It was often in the 9s, and the doctor would be like, oh, it's too high. But there also were not the tools really to do it better.
Sure. Yeah. He's probably talking to himself. That's too high.
Yeah.
I wonder what I'm doing wrong here.
She.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Wow. In the 80s. Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
that was telling. I'm like, they made
parents,
lady doctors in the 80s? Sorry.
All the way back then in the 1980s. I was first with the male doctor, but he wasn't. I ended up switching to a different hospital because my care, was lacking, but it was still lacking at the new hospital. And that was more because of what was available and the way they were managing back then. I can't really blame the doctor. My mother, my parents, but really my mother took me to Dr. Bernstein at one point. That was a whole disaster. He's really not for kids.
Dr. Bernstein, the low carb guy?
Yes.
How did she find him? Would she corner him on the street? What happened?
Well, we live in New York and he was in Westchester. So I guess she was part of a support group, and she probably heard about him from some of the adults in the support group. And I don't think that helped at all. So after Dr. Bernstein, I ended up switching to the female doctor in a different hospital. They put me back into the hospital for another 4 or 5 days to, get me back to a baseline or something. Mm-hmm. And we went to Jocelyn at one point in Boston. So we tried, but it was just.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was just limited, right? The insulins were limited. The technology was non-existent, and your goals were unclear, I would imagine, right? And how long until you
Correct.
How long until you were doing multiple daily injection? Like, when did you start shooting for food specifically?
I don't really remember, probably older teens.
Okay. And then I have one last question before I go back to Naomi. Why did you not like the low carb approach?
I think it was too hard for me as a kid. It was so restrictive.
Okay.
It was like you eat these 3 things a day and you're done. And I think it was just too hard. Mm-hmm.
In hindsight, do you see it as good advice?
If you can do it, if you're an adult and you buy in, I think low carb, you need a lot less insulin. Okay. So it's probably easier to keep your sugars stable if you go low carb. But I personally am not low carb, and I don't know that I ever would do it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're an adult and you could buy in and do it willingly, then yes, I could definitely see it working.
Okay. Naomi, how did it make you feel when you realized you didn't really know much about Simma's life?
Well, I wanted to ask her now because, like, I happen to have very bad long-term memory. Like, I don't remember a lot of things that, like, my friends remember from childhood. I think I only remember the bad things. But, I don't remember, like, our lives changing that much. Like, I don't remember having special foods or my mother, like, we still had cake. We still had cereal. We had, like, all the food that we normally had. Simmy, did we have soda?
This is going to be like a therapy session. We live two different lives. You guys all resented me so much. You used to say, Simmy got diabetes and now everything needs to change. We can't have what we used to have. We this, we that. You really don't remember anything.
I don't remember. I was a teenager. I think I was just, it literally was right when I became a teenager. So
what I'm hearing is that Simma gets like thrust into a more adult role over her health. And so the way she sees the outside world changes. Whereas, Naomi, you and the others are just like, nothing means anything. You go to school, you mess around with your friends, you do your homework, there's cartoons on the weekend. Like, that's it, really. Like, you're not thinking about life the way she is all of a sudden. You know what I mean? Like, Simma, you got leveled up like 50 levels out of nowhere.
First of all, they noticed that I was getting a lot of attention. Mm-hmm. They didn't like that. More than my fair share. They resented it. Every 3 months, once we switched to the new doctor in Manhattan, every 3 months we'd go for an appointment. My mother would take off the day from work. After we went to the doctor, we'd go shopping. These things, like, kids notice that. Oh, my sister gets to go shopping with my mom alone 4 times a year in Manhattan. We don't get to do that. I think the cake became more limited, like maybe only on weekends. There were definite food things that changed in the house. Even though Naomi doesn't remember it, it happened. The only advantage they got was that soda went from being only on the weekends to we were allowed to have it during the week, because I guess my mother felt like it's too limiting to say, like, oh, you can only drink water. So she used to let me have soda at the meal, so everyone else could also have soda then.
See?
Diet soda.
Diet soda.
I guess, I guess that's when I started drinking diet. I think you're right. That I remember. We weren't allowed to have soda, and then we were allowed to have diet soda.
What an ingrate, Simma, huh? She got soda, and then she's like, but it was diet. Do you think that people who are younger can, like, believe or understand how we grew up with soda like it was a refreshing treat? Like, no one thought about the health implications of it at all. Like, it was like magic to get soda. Do you know what I mean?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And now I look at it and I think, what? Like, why would you drink this? Like, just
right.
Like, this is such a strange decision. But anyway, okay, so this is really interesting because I understand Naomi's point of view. Like, somebody was like, she has diabetes, and you're like, oh, that sucks. But it's not like you have like a ton of empathy when you're a teenager. You're not putting yourself in her shoes. And then you see the changes that are happening for you, and they are impressed upon you more sincerely. So you just remember how it happened to you. And that's it. Like, what happened to you when Simma was diagnosed from type 1 diabetes was this happened, and my mom took her shopping. And by the way, took a day off from work, which I bet your mom never did. So that probably seemed pretty special to the outsider. Simma, you see that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but you didn't give a shit back then.
And I still like to go shop. I still like to go get myself a treat after I go to the doctor.
Your mom was setting up an expensive...
That's been like ingrained in me.
Yeah, an expensive little thing. Arden and I go out to... Well, I don't know if Arden and I will ever go to an endo appointment together again or not, but we usually go for lunch afterwards and eat something that's really hard to bolus for, just to like stick our thumb in the eye of what has happened. So to prove we can do it. Simma, do you have any like long-term health issues from diabetes?
Thank God, no.
That's really cool. Because it doesn't sound like in the beginning you were doing anything purposefully. So you're just doing that old-timey shoot and eat thing.
Right. I would say in my 20s was when my control got really good. And then we were only shooting for 7. So by today's standards, 7 is still, if I was 7 now, I'd be really disappointed in myself. So I got a pump in my early 20s because I got married and I wanted to have a baby. And my doctor said I had to have an A1C of 7 in order to have a baby, and that maybe a pump would help me with that.
Mm.
I have 4 children, thank God, all healthy. And yeah, so far so good. The eyes are good. So far everything's good.
It's amazing. Good for you. That's really excellent. And now, how do you manage now? Like, what technology do you have?
I have Tandem with Control IQ and
G6.
Dexcom G6.
Nice. And how about you, Naomi? What are you using?
So I was MDI from November 2020 until the end of June 2022, and now I'm on Omnipod 5.
And you're doing Omnipod 5. This is interesting.
And you know, the first doctor I went to didn't offer me the Dexcom. I changed doctors because I was actually whole food plant-based at that point when I was diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to find a doctor that supported that and wasn't telling me to eat low carb. And I found a doctor and she's like, "Oh, we got to get you a Dexcom." And I'm like, "What's a Dexcom?" Like, I knew nothing about the technology.
In that
moment, and that's.
Did Simma have one? No, don't be sorry. Did Simma have one when you were getting diagnosed?
Yeah. She had everything.
Do you guys talk ever? Sorry.
No, yes, I told her to get it.
This actually brought us closer. But it all sounded so weird to me to put something on your body. And it was just, now it's like.
Ooh, girls, I have to take this call. Hold on one second. I'm so sorry. I'll let you listen in.
Okay.
Hello?
Okay.
Yes, how are you? Do you have something this afternoon for me? I do. What time you got? Consider me there. Plainsboro? Tomorrow morning. Yes, we can do the second one. Pulling up my calendar. We can do the second one, the 27th, I'm going to be pretty wrecked. But how about after the 28th? The 29th would be perfect in the afternoon. My schedule's really packed that week. On the 29th? You're a gem. Thank you. I'll be there. Bye. Hey, I'm sorry for derailing this, but my ferritin is 7 right now, and I'm getting an iron infusion this afternoon. So that was the most important thing that's happened to me in quite some time, that phone call.
Good luck.
I apologize. Thank you so much. I'm in the middle of working with an endocrinologist to try to figure out why this keeps happening. But we were doing...
The one you had on the podcast?
Addie, yes. And
yes.
For the thyroid stuff.
That was one of our favorite episodes.
Oh, isn't she terrific?
Yes.
Yeah, She's really, really terrific. She's pretty local. I mean, are you guys still in Manhattan?
Well, we're not. I'm not in Manhattan. I'm in Queens, and Naomi's far away.
Oh, she ran away?
I know, she's far away.
I moved away.
Well, Naomi, I see your last name. Did you leave the tribe, or what did you do?
What do you mean, did I leave the tribe?
I don't know.
I have a Jewish last name.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
No, I didn't. I didn't leave the tribe. We, we were like one of the COVID migrants that we moved out of the tri-state area.
Oh, yeah. Everyone thought to do that. Everyone here was like, "Should we go?"
Yeah, I'm in a tax-free state.
Oh, that sounds better. As a person who has to pay taxes on a small business that has no overhead whatsoever. Every year my accountant goes, you have no overhead. What am I going to write off? And I'm like, I don't know.
I lived in New Jersey for 20 years.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. It's taxing the crap out of me here. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that I'm going to get an iron infusion, and that's amazing because I feel terrible. I'm so run down. I'm going to use up my entire day's energy talking to you guys. No lie. Okay, so I want to recap a little bit because the phone call obviously threw things off. You guys grow up together. Simma's got diabetes. It's a clear divide between her perspective and yours. Then you said something earlier. You stopped to apologize to her, Naomi, after you were diagnosed. Was that one of your first thoughts after you started having type 1 is, oh my God, this is what my sister's been doing?
I don't know if that was we definitely brought us closer. We talked about diabetes a lot because I had nobody else to talk about it with. She gave me a lot of good advice. Because literally they tell you nothing as an adult.
Yeah.
They literally tell you nothing. So, I'm the type of person that I want to know as much as I can. And I definitely want to stay healthy. I'm very into my health and I want to stay healthy to see my children. They're mostly grown up, but I want to be here a long time. So we got closer and I just realized that I didn't know a lot about her day to day, because there is a lot of day to day when you have type 1 diabetes.
Right.
I mean, something I will say about growing up is that, there were times my mother would say, oh, Simma gets this because she has diabetes. And I was jealous when she met Dorothy Hamill. Remember that, Simmy?
I don't remember that.
You went?
Where did I meet Dorothy Hamill?
She's the JD. She was the JDRF spokeswoman, right? Or she was very involved with them.
Dorothy Hamill? Like the ice skater?
I thought you met her. Who did you meet? You met someone famous.
Wait a minute. I'm
love
Googling
this.
It. I'm having so much fun.
I don't remember.
Finally, Sim's like, I don't know what you're talking about. No idea.
We have to get our mother on the podcast.
Well, not only that.
We have to get her on. She would have all the information.
Simma, again, how interesting is this? You don't remember that, and it's a salient memory for her. She's like, remember when I got fucked out of meeting Dorothy Hamill? And it's possible that you've never met that.
I told you they resented me. They resented me.
We probably did. I mean, I'm sure we resented things. So
that was just fascinating. Like you
got over it.
It really is like just a simple thing. I mean, you guys have kids now though. So you see this in your own children, right? They're very self-centered and focused and on themselves and their experiences, which I think we all pretty much appreciate. Plus, you're in this additional situation where diabetes isn't an easy thing to manage in the 80s. And your mom is probably just like, I mean, I love the quote, like, Simma has diabetes, don't talk to me. That was like, I thought that was very telling. Like, that's your mom incredibly overwhelmed,
Yes.
Yeah. It's super interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure she was very tired. I think it was like right when they came back from the hospital.
Yeah.
And she needs her sleep. So yeah, but it was, there was a lot going on in our house. We were at that point, Simma, who was born. I mean, Chaya was a baby. Was Chaya a baby?
Yeah. 4 of us.
Yeah.
4 of us were born.
Yeah, and it was a baby, and there was a lot going on.
You just said something really interesting. It was an off-the-cuff thing. I'm assuming it's like an inside joke or a known thing between the two of you. Mom needs her sleep, but Mom had undiagnosed thyroid issues.
I don't know it at that point, because her thyroid issues were diagnosed maybe 25 years after that. So she might not have at that point.
I don't know. I
don't know either.
I think people live with it a long time and don't realize it. They're like, oh, I'm always tired, or like that kind of
thing.
Be,
but she did everything. My mother. My father was always at work. I mean, she did everything.
Okay.
So, and she would get up very early in the morning. She still does. And being in the hospital is just exhausting. And I think that literally was when they walked in from the hospital, and we were like, "What's going on?" We probably like attacked them at the door.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, Simma has diabetes. Don't talk to me right now. I'm sure it was a lot.
Yeah, no, she was probably like, I can't believe I had 5 kids and one of them's got diabetes and this guy's working all the time. That's probably what she was thinking. What would you be thinking in that? You know what I mean? Right?
Probably. Yeah.
So you're both using an algorithm now, but a different one. So how did you make the decision? Like, Simma, like what made you choose a tandem pump?
Okay, so I have a great story actually about this. So I was on Medtronic from when I was in my early 20s. I was on MiniMed pumps, and I did not like the MiniMed sensor. It hurt and it wasn't accurate and it constantly went offline. I really didn't like it. Yeah. And my pump went out of warranty, and my doctor said, you should consider getting the T-Slim. I've heard great things about it, and it has it has control IQ and whatever. And I was like, okay, maybe, but also as much as I did not love MiniMed at that point, I hate change. So it was a Sunday during COVID, and we went to the beach because you got to get out of the house during COVID. And we're on the beach, and I'm like, oh, I should start researching the tandem pump. I have to decide this week. And I look up, and about 15 feet away is a man wearing a tandem pump and a Dexcom sensor. And I'm like, thank you, God. This is perfect.
I'll go with this sign.
No, so I was like, I'm going to go speak to him.
Yeah.
So I walked over and he's like, whoa, stop, because he didn't want me to come close because of COVID. And I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. I'm like, pardon me, but I noticed you're wearing an insulin pump and a sensor. And do you mind telling me about them? Because I have a mini med pump and I'm considering changing. Not only did he wear a tandem pump and a Dexcom sensor, but he was a nurse in a diabetes program in one of the local hospitals. So he really knew about it.
Yeah.
So he told me it was great. And then I was like, okay, I'm not going to do any research. I'm just going to get it. So I've been really happy with that combination.
Wow, good. That's excellent. And isn't it interesting too? Like you just needed someone with some confidence to be like, this is good. And then you can kind of trust it a little bit. And then, so then it's interesting, Naomi, when you get type 1, why do you not gravitate towards what Simma's doing?
I mean, I don't know. Because I guess,
I remember.
What?
I remember because I said to you, why don't you get a pump? And you said, and your control was very good at that point. You were probably still honeymooning. And you said, oh, I don't need one. I'm doing really well on MDI. We discussed it a few times.
Yeah, I did very, very well. I brought my A1C down to I think it was in the very low 5s very quickly. I was very careful with what I ate. So then I started listening a lot to the podcast, and I'm like, you know what? I'll wait for Omnipod 5. I didn't want to go on a pump and then have to change when the next big thing was coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want tubes. So I waited for Omnipod 5. And then actually the appointment they gave me was right after my son got married in June 2022. And the appointment was right after his wedding. And I was apprehensive about changing. So I called up the doctor. I'm like, is there any way I can move my appointment to a few weeks later? And they're like, no, the next appointment is in December. You know the way these doctors are. They can't fit you in. So I said, okay, I'll keep my appointment. And it really wasn't, changing from MDI to Omnipod 5, it really wasn't a big deal. I was just apprehensive about the change. I did go a little crazy once I was able to pump. I ate a lot more than I should have because it was just so easy not to give myself a shot. So I've kind of dialed back on that. But I love it. My A1C is 5.2. So
good for you. Oh, that's amazing. Do you have a certain fueling style you use, or how do you eat?
So I try to eat whole food, plant-based. It's hard sometimes because I'm cooking for my whole family and nobody else is. But I'm definitely on the high carb. I'm on the high carb side. I have between 200 and 300 carbs a day.
Mm-hmm. But specifically plant-based carbs.
Yeah, I try to stay plant-based. Am I 100%? No, I'm probably 80%.
It's pretty impressive. How about you, Simma? How do you eat?
I try to stick. I've heard a couple of people on the podcast say this also. I try to kind of stick to the same breakfast and lunch because I figured out how to cover them without spikes and what works. And then dinner, it varies, but there's no specific. It's not necessarily low carb, but it's probably lower carb because I'm conscious of it. Just regular.
Yeah. Is it interesting, Simma, to watch someone be diagnosed in a modern time? Do you watch what's happening to Naomi and be like, wow, if this was like this for me, this would have been amazing?
Well, I'll tell you, about 10 years ago, my friends, it was probably 13 or 14 years ago, my friend's son was diagnosed, and he was put on what I was put on 36 years ago, a sliding scale. And I said, you get him out of that hospital right now. There's so much more available now. And she did. And she moved him to a different hospital. But Naomi, I'm happy for people who are diagnosed now. I'm sad for them that they're diagnosed, but I'm happy for them because there's just so much out there. I don't prick my finger anymore, really. I'm not a big calibrator. I don't really calibrate my G7, my G6. I find that it works. So it's a whole different lifestyle. And even the way you talk about Arden's control, the way you can monitor her and reach out to her. And, we were just flying blind back then.
Arden is...
So I'm happy.
Yeah, I'm glad. And this is Arden's last day of her quarter in college. And she slept in a little bit this morning. Then she had to go to class and drop off her last project. And she's not feeling well. She's got that last week rundown cold they all have while they're running around trying to get their stuff done. And while she was sleeping this morning, I saw her blood sugar rising, and I remotely pushed up her basal with Loop and stopped it while she was sleeping.
Wow.
Yeah. And I know that's Loop. It's not a, a commercially available product, but I think stuff like that, like phone control and remote control and stuff like that, I think all that's going to keep moving forward. This is really, this stuff's amazing, but it's sort of tip of the iceberg. So it's really cool.
The day I got the tandem bolus from the phone installed, I was like, let's make a party. It was just, every little move forward, like you're saying, maybe it's tip of the iceberg and hopefully there's a lot more to come. But every move forward is just incredible. When I was about 12, my parents took me to do a trial for an infrared glucose sensor. It was going to be able to read your blood sugar by shining a light on your finger.
I remember this. Yeah.
That was so exciting. But guess what? It never happened. Well, now maybe I have to wear something, but I don't have to prick my finger. You know
what the one that gets me right now is that Apple Watch is trying to add like blood glucose, but it's so obviously not going to be for therapeutic use, but everybody gets so excited anytime a news story comes about it. One day I won't need a CGM. Like my watch will tell me, like, if you think in your lifetime a watch sensor through your skin is going to be as accurate as something under your skin reading interstitial fluid, like if that happens, I'll eat my hat. But like, I don't see that coming anytime soon. It's interesting to see people's excitement when they don't really understand the technology as much as they just want it to work and they know it's possible. So I even like that it feels possible, that people could actually believe like, oh, my watch, maybe one day I'll be able to dose insulin from my watch, like just from what it tells me. I like that that's hopeful, because I think that in the years prior to Dexcom coming out, maybe their second or third generation, when it became clear they were going to like iterate and keep going, they weren't just going to give you something and go, here it is, this is it. Because up until then, that was the world. The Medtronic pump story tells it. Medtronic has a huge market share of insulin pumps. And you can't find 3 people to tell you that they enjoy the experience. And yet they don't really change it that quickly. Whereas, so when Dexcom came out, and it was like the first one was, I would say you use the first Dexcom for the arrow. Like the direction. That's mostly what you cared about. Like, oh, my blood sugar's moving, because the number wasn't great in the beginning. And so we'd use it for direction. And then you thought, well, this is going to be what this is. And then boom, here's another version of it. And here's another version of it. And we improved the filament wire and we improved the software. And I was like, oh man, these people are on it. Like they're going to keep, going. And it's just super. And you can see how that translates to the population, who now just a handful of years later is like, oh, my watch will probably tell me my blood sugar one day. Like people are actually hopeful. And that's, it's really something, because I imagine when you were growing up, Simma, there was no hope that anything was happening. Like that meter you got was what you had for 15 years, right?
Yeah. Well, my doctor, the female doctor, the second or third, the doctor we went to after Dr. Bernstein, she used to tell my mother, like, oh, in like 20 years, there'll be a cure. But then, there didn't really seem to be progress towards a cure. And then I kind of went into like, oh, there'll never be a cure, but now I feel like even if this is as far as it gets, and I don't think this will be as far as it gets, like you're saying, I think it's tip of the iceberg. And you see with every new year or two, something new is coming out. If this is as good as it gets, this is pretty good.
Yeah. Well, it's not bad, I'll tell you. But Naomi, what's the other side of that? Like, because people who are newly diagnosed are very impatient, I find, because they expect cell phone progress. Like, you know what I mean? Like every year somebody goes, here, it's a new phone. The camera's better. It's this. We made this improvement. Like that's how people want things. Do you see that? Like, do you see like the, what's the question? Like, when you're online and there's like a Dexcom server outage, and so people lose their CGM for a little while, and the newer diagnosed people are just like they're Scarlett O'Hara. They've got their forearm to their head, and they're like, oh, they've got the vapors and everything's going wrong, and this is it. We're all gonna die. And the older people are like, yo, just chill out. It's okay. Like test a couple of times. Like, do you see that difference?
Yeah, maybe because I'm older, I don't get to, it works fine for me. And if something happens or it's out or my sensor's a little wonky, so report the issue to Dexcom. I don't go crazy. I'm not managing a child's diabetes, which
Sure.
I have a friend, her son was diagnosed when he was a baby and he's 9 now. We have me and this kid happen to have the same birthday. So it's just, we became close, me and the mom.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard. He's on Omnipod 5. She doesn't know what he's eating and when. And she has a totally different experience managing his diabetes than I have managing my own, using Omnipod 5.
Sure.
I don't think Omnipod 5 works that well when you're not bolusing correctly. So
nothing does.
So I think but sorry, I left my AirPod.
No. Oh, while you're I'll just say that that's an interesting take too, is that, I'll use an automated system and I'll just slap it on and it's going to work. It's still all settings, understanding how insulin works, understanding the impacts of your food. Like that has not changed about diabetes, whether it's an algorithm or not an algorithm. And,
right.
But there's a whole new generation of people who are going to think like magic. Like this is magic. I'll put this on and that's it. I won't need to know anything, but we're not there. Yeah. We're not to that point yet.
Yeah. It still takes effort.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not one of those that gets excited when I didn't watch the movie about pancreas transplant it's working for me now. It does take effort. I am a little envious of people who can eat anything whenever they want, but yeah, it is what it is.
Right. But, and did you suffer that? Or you just kind of, this is funny. I just realized if I was alone with Naomi, I'd say, well, you sound level-headed. And then I realized her sister's here who might just start laughing if I say something like that. but it's just a more mature, seasoned response.
Yeah. And Simma said to me when I was diagnosed, she's like, you should be very thankful you were diagnosed now and not, in the 1980s. And I am. I don't want to be diagnosed. I don't want to have type 1, like the war in the Ukraine, I stock up my Omnipods, I make sure to refill my prescriptions immediately. I'm totally reliant on medication now, which is a little scary for someone who wasn't. All I took was Synthroid, which even that, my husband's like, stock up.
So when there was a war in the Ukraine, it made you get extra insulin pumps?
Well, no, I just make sure to refill my prescription. It's I don't let it lapse because that was one of the things that people couldn't get their insulin.
Naomi,
I'm married to a prepper. So.
This paranoia is why there's a run on banks right now. Because everybody,
we don't do any of that.
Because everybody can't just be like, oh yeah, I'm sure the banking system's going to collapse in 2022.
What I'm saying is that for 49 years I didn't need insulin to live, and now I do. So
yeah, it becomes very important. No, I understand. Listen, I think anyone who's had diabetes has daydreamed what they'll do when the zombies come. What pharmacy will I go to and steal all the insulin from immediately? Yeah. How am I going to keep things cold? Arden and I had a conversation once. We were watching Walking Dead back when it was cool. And she's like, oh, I guess I'd be dead pretty quick, huh? And I was like, yeah. I didn't even know what else to say. I was like, I'm sure we could scavenge some stuff, but there wouldn't be refrigeration, and the insulin would probably still work even though it was unrefrigerated, not the way it's intended to, but maybe we could stretch it out a little bit. And she's like, so a couple of months? And I was like, yeah. I was like, well, we could find running water to keep it cold. I was like, that's an idea. Like a stream. And we're having this conversation, and you should have seen how matter of factly she was just like, oh, okay. All right. She wasn't upset by it. She was just like, oh, I don't make it through the apocalypse. Got it. So it was interesting.
Well, I totally relate to what Naomi's saying. And our 4 grandparents were Holocaust survivors. Mm-hmm. So I think that some of it comes from there. I always say, if there was another Holocaust, I would be one of the people who didn't make it.
Yeah.
Because I'm too reliant, on the medication. So, and I also used to be a stocker upper until my insurance started costing an arm and a leg for everything. And now I don't stock up as much because it's just unaffordable.
Mm-hmm. I had a thought. Where'd it go? Damn it. I started thinking something stupid, and then I was pushing the stupid thought out of my head and I lost my real thought. Listen, me plus low iron, you know what I mean? So that's all I got. I'm going to jump over my question and come to a different one, and then I'll circle back if I think of it again. So I'm interested, Naomi, you reach out into the world and find the podcast. So I'm going to ask Simma a quick question, then go back to you. So Simma, did you have any contact or community around diabetes?
So I knew here and there, I knew individuals with diabetes who I was not necessarily close to and did not necessarily speak to all the time. Mm-hmm. And I'd say my control was good to really good, but maybe not great. And I was kind of just going along. Okay, I've been told for my whole life that 7 was the gold standard. So if I was like 6.5, I'm like, this is great, Yeah,
right.
And it actually took the perspective of someone newly diagnosed to be, I thought like, oh, I know everything. I could have found out about the tandem probably like 2 years before I did, if I actually was connected the way she ended up being connected.
Yeah.
So she found the podcast and she told me about it, and I was like, "Oh, okay, maybe I'll listen." I don't need to know anything, and it really helped. I mean, I would say like you didn't say anything that I didn't know or didn't think about already, but just kind of hearing it, being reminded. I was not a big pre-boluser at all.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's
and since I listen to the podcast, I'm much more careful about pre-bolusing, and that has made a huge difference. Huge.
I've heard this before. I'm glad. I've heard this before. People who've had diabetes for a long time will say, yeah, I listened to the podcast, and I mean, you didn't say a ton of things I didn't know. And I always think, when people say that, I always think, well, like, yeah, well, you had diabetes for 20 years. Like, you must have figured some of this out, right? But then the second part of what you said is their big takeaway. If the podcast is really valuable to them, they say it's just a reminder, and they listen to people's conversations, and that's what kind of keeps them, I guess, connected with what they need to do. And I think that's terrific. It was certainly not something I envisioned, but I've heard about it so many times now that I'm just completely sure of it. Like some people are like, why do you have so many episodes? And I was like, because I don't think of this as a diabetes podcast. I think of it as a podcast, first of all. And I think that if I put up 3 conversations with 3 different people a week, I don't expect that you're going to listen to all 3 of them, but I like you to have choice, and I like you to be engaged. And then, of course, we like to move, and then bring in some management talk every week so that people can kind of like just refresh a little bit and keep going. Like I'm trying to have a long-term view of it. And what you just said makes me feel really, really good about that. So thank you. So Naomi, how do you find the podcast?
Yeah. And
I'm sorry, Simma. No, Simma, go ahead.
Sorry. Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
You'll be happy. You'll be happy you let me say this. You always say that you're not such a smart guy, and you're, if you could figure it out, anyone can. I have to say, you really have a gift. I mean, I'm an editor and a writer, so I'm very into words, and you really do have a gift for the way you explain things. The whole way you go over the tug of war of the insulin and the food, like that is a great visual. And again, even though that was something I knew, to hear it put like that, it gives you a different perspective to be able to visualize it like that. So I have to disagree with your assessment that you're not so smart.
Maybe I'm just being folksy when I say that, Simma.
Yeah.
How about on the last episode of the podcast, I'll tell everybody my IQ. You want to do that? Because I happen to know it, because they tested it a lot when I was a kid, which, by the way, is not fun.
Sounds good.
When they keep first time kindergarten, knock, knock, knock on the kindergarten door. I can picture myself standing at the door next to Mrs. Moon, who was my kindergarten teacher. And Naomi, I have no long-term memory, so that I know this is a real memory. The gentleman from the guidance office was outside. She went outside, chatted with him quietly, walked back in, brought me in the hall. Now, I was fairly certain that they had caught me doing something terrible and I was going down, even though I was 5 years old. I was like, oh, this is it. They got me. So I get out there and she bends down and she's in one of those like it's just a classic 70s thing. Like she had horn rimmed glasses and a long dress and, and she says, this is the guidance counselor. She introduces him by name and says, he wants you to go take a test. And I was like, for what? And he goes, this was the explanation. And trust me, this is not what you should say to children, because it's still with me all these years later, and it wasn't good. She said, they think you're smarter than the other kids. And I was like, and there it is right there. That's probably my ego right there. Probably started when I was 5. I was like, I am smarter than these little idiots. I look around. I see the dopey looks on their faces. I'm taking this whole thing over. But no, they sent me, I got my first IQ test, and then my score remained exactly the same every time they gave it to me for years. And they would pull me in there constantly and make me take it over and over again. But I never did well in school. I was actually a poor student. Like a C plus, I was like walking around like I had 105. I was like, I did it. I'm like over the C. And I wouldn't have gotten my first real adult job where I wasn't working my ass off if part of the hiring process wasn't an IQ test. Like I sat down to get a job and they said, we want you to take this test. I was like, whatever. So I start filling it out and I looked up at the person and I said, hey, this is an IQ test. And she goes, how do you know that? And I said, this is like the 30th one I've ever taken. Like, this is an IQ test. So I rolled through it, gave it to her. And like 10 minutes later, they came out and they're like, you're hired. I was like, okay. And then the lady behind her goes, that's a good score you got on that test. And I was like, cool, thanks. And I was so like blue collar and poor that I was just like, wow, someone's going to give me a job where there are chairs and air conditioning. I was like, this is amazing. like this is really, but I swear to you, I don't understand algebra. I don't really know where commas go. I don't understand any of the things that classically you're supposed to understand coming out of high school. My brain just works a weird way. That's all. So anyway, after this is over, I'll tell you guys my IQ, but not on the recording. Okay. But I appreciate you saying that. What I have found, and I don't know if I've ever said this in the podcast before, but I think the thing you're giving me credit for is happenstance, because I grew up in a very blue collar home because I was adopted by people who I'm not related to. And so they were just lovely, decent, like hardworking, people. They didn't have extra money. They didn't go on a vacation. And I think that what you're hearing is a blend of how my brain works and how I was raised mixed together. I think that's why it occurs to me to tell people about a bolus like it's a tug of war instead of saying something that sounds like I learned it in college. And I actually think that's why the podcast is helpful to people, because I'm a blend of like two different cultures. But Naomi, I wanted to ask you, like, how did you find the podcast and what did it do for you?
So, I mean, as I said, I knew nothing and nobody was helping me. My sister was helping me, but, I guess for her, she's had it for so many years. I think I read Think Like a Pancreas, but books are not like super dynamic. A lot of the information was a little older. Mm-hmm. I think just one night I Googled type 1 diabetes podcasts and I listened to a different one and it was like, oh, okay. And then I started listening to yours and I guess I found the Jenny episodes and things like that. And I was like, wow, this is what I need to know.
Yeah.
Nobody told me a thing about pre-bolusing. Nobody told me anything. Mm-hmm. And I just started listening. And, one thing that you say that really, I have your voice in my head a lot is if you know it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Don't keep doing the same thing every day. Because I have the same breakfast every day. And it literally, if I tweak it differently, sometimes I'll go up very high and sometimes I'll be very flat. So like today I did the thing that keeps it very flat. I pre-bolus for a little longer.
Yeah.
So just things like that. Now when I go to the doctor, like I hate going to the doctor because I just feel it's just such a waste of my time. I feel like if you know how to manage your type 1 diabetes well, day in, day out, you shouldn't have to go to a doctor.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think that?
Because I'm literally sitting there. They weigh me, they take my blood pressure, they ask me some questions. They're billing my insurance. They're not giving me any information that I need.
Yeah.
Nothing. I get nothing from my doctor other than my prescription. I mean, as an adult, it's a disease that you're living with daily. And other than my labs, I need my lab. They're not telling me anything.
Yeah. I did a survey.
Right.
I don't know if you saw, give me a second, Simma, I'll come right back to you. I did a survey recently. Mm-hmm. I got over, I don't know, like 1,100 listeners of the podcast to take a survey. Listen, I'm not a professional survey writer, so I'm sure there are people who will read it and be like, you didn't answer the right questions. But here's what I got out of the survey. 2-1, people trust the podcast over their physician. And that threw me off. Like, I know we talk about it and it, people tell the same story. Like, that's the nice guy with the prescription pad that I go see every once in a while. But I was like, I just didn't think it would be that stark. Like the numbers are so stark, I don't even know if I'm going to share them with people. It looks like they're made up. And good.
I mean, I will say if it was a functional doctor, like the doctor you interviewed, but you can't even see a functional doctor on insurance. So, I mean, a functional doctor, I think would help me because she'd be looking at me as a whole, as opposed to just my labs.
Yeah.
But with the doctors I'm seeing now, I mean, so my doctor was away on vacation. They're like, do you want to see the nurse practitioner? I'm like, sure, I'll see anyone. Or the PA. I don't care who I see. They're all basically doing the same thing. They're checking my numbers for a few minutes, and then they're writing me and they're refilling my prescriptions.
Yeah. Your point about that's not lost. Like I saw Addie, like I told you, I don't know if I said it on the recording or not, but she's trying to help me with my iron and everything. And my first sit down appointment with her was 90 minutes long. Like we sat for an hour, like it included like a physical inspection of my carcass, but we also like, you know, like we were in there talking about like, she's like, start at the beginning. And like as a child, and I went through my whole life and everything I could remember about my health, my digestion, like all the things that I thought were pertinent to why I was there. And she did such a comprehensive blood draw. But you're not wrong. Like I have to pay her in cash. Now I can turn it into my insurance and they will probably cover like 60% of it. But it's still like, if you want somebody to sit and doctor house with you, it's not going to happen inside of the system. The system just doesn't allow for that. And a lot of us have issues that need more than just like, oh, I ran a lab and this is it. And like, we're all good now.
Right.
Yeah. It's really something. And now, Simma, you were going to jump in and say something. Do you remember what it was?
I think that what Naomi's saying and what your 2-to-1 podcast listeners are saying are accurate for people like us who take charge of their health. And
correct.
You know, I'm not afraid to change I just adjusted my basal rate last night. I'm not one of those who says, well, in 2.5 months, when I go into my endocrinologist, I'll ask her if I can raise my basal by 0.1 from 10 p.m. to midnight.
Yeah.
You know, so some people maybe do need to go to the doctor.
Well, I think what happens, what you're saying is that some people need to be reminded or pushed or, you know, or sometimes they don't see the forest for the trees. Like all the things are in front of them and they go, I don't know, like I see 2 + 2, but I don't know what that equals. And so that's what a doctor ends up doing. They ask you how you are, you tell them a little story and they try to infer from your story what's going on with you. And then they make some suggestions if you're lucky and you have a decent doctor. And there are people who then can use these conversations in the podcast to do that for themselves. Like it's a sounding board that doesn't talk back to them. They go like, oh, I heard that. I maybe should look at my whatever, pre-bolus, my basal, my carb ratio. And I think it's the conversation. It's the conversation you need that you don't get at most doctors unless you're going to pay them, I mean, honestly, $200-$300 for a visit. Because cash doctors are, you know, they're cash doctors. And also they're not all good. We took Arden to somebody once for her issues and nothing came of it. It was like a hippie lady sitting in a room, like, you know, pontificating about what could be and what could be, but she wasn't good at really figuring things out. Addie's terrific. Like she's really something, actually. I want to mention here, and I hope this is being appreciated, Simma, that I've gotten your sister to say your name correctly. She's now saying Simma. Have you heard it?
It's very hard. Very, very hard.
I'm not going to get the right credit for this, although I think she's going to flip back as soon as we get off of this recording. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you guys wanted to? I want to make sure I'm not missing anything.
I mean, I just want to say that, you know, whatever you're doing, keep doing, because you're really helping people. So many people are having better results because of the podcast. I mean, I'm sure I'm just one of many, many people.
Thank you. That's very nice. I don't know how many people listen because oddly, that's not information Apple shares with people. But I see the downloads and I can tell you that we're talking in March. It's mid-March right now, 2023. This calendar year got to 1 million downloads in like 57 days. And I went from 10 million to 11 million in less than 2 months. As far as and that's download streams, like however somebody listens to the show. And this week in the first 3 days of this week, the podcast had twice as many downloads as it did in 2015, which is just insane. So it reaches people because people have, like Naomi, like she had an experience and she looked up and said, oh, I know a person with diabetes. I'll tell them about it. And then, you know a kid who has it, and I'm sure you've told them. And Simma, have you told people about the podcast?
Definitely have.
Yeah. And see, that's just what happens. So the truth of it is it's easy to digest good information, and it does a lot of other things that I don't talk about as much, but we spoke about earlier today, like just supporting the idea of keeping you motivated, which I think is what most of these motivation podcasts are. Like, ex-Marines who are screaming at you to get up at 4 a.m. and go for a run on their podcast or whatever, like anywhere in between. It's just somebody reminding you, like, hey, do a thing, hey, do a thing, hey, do a thing. And anyway.
I don't think so. Scott, can I disagree? I don't think you're just reminding people. I think that you're showing them that it's possible. Based on your care of Arden, you're showing them that it's possible.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that that's very powerful.
Right. I appreciate that. And it's funny too, because the show has become such a thing. This is going to sound like a brag, but the show like regularly charts in the top 15 of its category. Right. And if you look at the shows that are above it, they're all run by like corporations or groups of people. And like, I'm going away tomorrow to see my kids. And so I'm going to be gone for like 10 days. So I had to do 3 weeks worth of work in the last like 8 days so that I can go away. And because the podcast is just me, and the reason I bring that up is because I get lost in what it is sometimes. Because the thing you just said is something that I used to say all the time, which is early on when I made this podcast, the vibe in the diabetes community was that you never shared any good news you had because it would make other people feel bad if they were struggling. And I heard that, and I always rubbed up against that. I always thought that that's not right. Like so you're telling me that there are people out there who know how to do these things, and they're off somewhere not thinking about diabetes very often with some A1C in the 5s and a great prognosis for their life and everything. And they're not going to say anything because it might hurt someone's feelings. I was like, I don't buy into that. Like, I think that's aspirational. And I think if we set it up as aspirational, instead of setting it up through a victim mentality, which is kind of how it was set up in the past, like, you can't say what is good for you because it makes me sad. Like, all right, well, get over that, because the things that I know are going to help you if you stop wanting to have your feelings hurt and start wanting to have like some of these experiences for yourself. Like, it's right there. So I agree with you. I think the aspirational nature of it is really important. I just forget to talk about it because I've been doing this for so long. And often what you hear from me is just what's ever like more top of my mind or more, I guess, prevalent in my life at the moment when I'm talking. But I appreciate you saying that because I believe
right.
in that.
Well, I went back to some older episodes when my sister told me about it. I mean, I'm still in the 400s. So I've listened to some newer ones, like when you have the Dexcom people on, or certain ones I listen to right away, but mostly I've kind of been working through them.
Oh, Simma, you're in for such a treat. I get so much better at this, like 2019, 2020. And my microphone gets better. You're in for
well, that's good.
You're in for a treat.
I think I passed that one already where you said you had the new microphone.
Oh my God. I'm still, if you brought it up right now, we were sitting around having coffee, which I wouldn't be drinking because I've never had coffee, but I just meant sitting around drinking something. I'm so mad about that first microphone still. I could have bought this mic and I didn't know. And I tried to save a little money. It still makes me upset. Anyway. All right. So what are we going over? You guys didn't know each other growing up about what was going on with diabetes. You obviously have a very close relationship now over it. I'm terrific. What else have we missed? Anything? This is it, right? Like,
well, I just have one funny, slightly funny story to share. So unlike you, we actually were very good students. All five of us were very good students. And recently we were at an event and I actually gave my brother-in-law, Naomi's husband, my phone because I wasn't going to really be able to have access to my phone. And I said, please watch my phone and let me know if I'm going high or going low and need to make any adjustments or whatever. And he also he was following her numbers on the follow app. So I think either he said it or one of her kids said it. They're like, this is the first time that one of them wants to have the lower number, the lower grade.
That's fantastic.
It was really funny.
Yeah, I did not have that problem. I needed 2 classes to get 100 points. I would have had to like add English to math, and then I could have had an A. Yeah, I don't know. It's really strange, and I'm not a proponent of it. By the way, I really like when my kids were in school. I was like, "You do good," and they did. By the way, but I just didn't. I mean, if I had to guess, I didn't grow up with people whose minds worked the way mine did, and their expectation was I'd get a job in my uncle's sheet metal shop. And that I just had to live through these first 18 years, and then I was allowed to work. Like it was kind of more like that. Anyway, all right, You guys were absolutely terrific. I have to go because I'm gonna go get my iron infusion. I need to get ready for that, and I'm very excited. Like when you hear parents go like,
good luck.
The things you're excited about when you're a parent. This is the best thing that's happened to me all year. I appreciate. There's no luck. I will sit there. They'll put an IV in. 45 minutes later, I will leave, and just like that, I will have the correct amount of ferritin and iron binding capacity and all the things that I do not have at the moment. And hopefully Addie and I can figure out why that is and put a stop to it. My bet is, this is completely conjecture, but my bet is this might be a thyroid thing for me. So we're going to find out when all the blood work comes back.
Bring Addie back. We want a new Addie episode.
I tell her all the time when I speak to her, I'm like, I tell her how many like downloads her episode has, and she's just like, that's amazing. She talks about, I should let her talk about it, but we talked in my appointment just real quickly about, she's starting to have that pressure about, I'm not reaching enough people. And she's starting to think about just making videos and putting them online and stuff like that. So
great.
Yeah, she's got a ton of information in her head. Okay, guys, I do have to jump. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It really is. It was nice to
meet
both of you. Hold on one second, okay? I want to thank Simma and Naomi for coming on the show today and sharing their rather interesting story with us. I also want to thank US Med, usmed.com/juicebox, or call 888-721-1514. Actually, that number is specifically special for Juicebox Podcast listeners. Get started today with US Med. You're going to love it. Having your supplies just show up at the house is, it's really fantastic. Takes a weight off your shoulders. I want to thank you for listening and remind you about the private Facebook group, Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. Head over there now, go to the featured tab, look into all of the different series within the podcast, or check it out at juiceboxpodcast.com. Once there was a time when I just told people, if you want a low and stable A1C, just listen to the Juicebox Podcast. But as the years went on and the podcast episodes grew, it became more and more difficult for people to listen to every one. So I made the Diabetes Pro Tip series. This series is with me and Jenny Smith. Jenny is a certified diabetes care and education specialist. She's also a registered and licensed dietitian and a type 1 herself for over 30 years. And I, of course, am the father of a child who was diagnosed at age 2 in 2006. The Pro Tip series begins at episode 210 with an episode called Newly Diagnosed or Starting Over. And from there, all about MDI, pre-bolusing, insulin pumping, bumping and nudging, variables, exercise, illness, injury, surgeries, glucagon, long-term health, bumping and nudging, how to explain type 1 to your family, postpartum, honeymoon, transitioning, all about insulin, temp basals. These are all different episodes. Setting your basal insulin, fat and protein, pregnancy, the glycemic index and load, and so much more, like female hormones and weight loss. Head now to juiceboxpodcast.com. Go up in the menu at the top and click on Diabetes Pro Tip. Or if you're in the private Facebook group, there's a list of these episodes right in the featured tab. Find out how I help keep my daughter's A1C between 5.2 and 6.2 for the last 10 years without diet restrictions. Juiceboxpodcast.com. Start listening today. It's absolutely free.